Hello everyone, British Boxing Blog here again, and welcome to our Thursday night preview show, which is in the middle of getting a new name, I think, left in the capable hands of Andrew. So I think he's sorting that out currently, so hopefully the next time we do one of these, we'll have a new name and logo. But yeah, Thursday night show.
New logo, catchy little intro.
Looking ahead to the weekend's fights, and a big weekend we've got coming up as well. I think last time, Andrew, we did it chronologically, but this time we might as well start with the big one, start at the top.
Right. Tommy Frank, straighten in the car park.
Is that the big one? I got on Dennis Hobson.
No, I think we'll get to that one. We'll get back to Sheffield via London. Should we start with?
Go on, we'll start with the big one, Saturday night. Anthony Joshua-Pulev.
Really getting arena, is it, in terms of British boxing?
Yeah. Big fight. Sky Sports box office. I know you'll have a lot of views on the whole package and the whole lot, as you tend to do when it comes out to pay-per-view fights, Andrew. So just your thoughts on the matchup, your thoughts on everything to do with it. What's your initial?
I think, first of all, it's important to mention that it is a mandatory for Joshua. In that sense, he doesn't have a choice in the opponent. Apart from that, it's hard to get excited about. And this is the biggest backhanded compliment I can pay Joshua. I've said this for a while about him. I'm not interested in seeing him with these routine defenses. I think most people's predictions, mine included, is that he's going to stop Pulev round the middle round, mid rounds, maybe go a little bit later, possibly. I've seen in predictions anywhere from knocking him out in 3 to sort of 7, 8, 9. I think stylistically, Pulev's fairly straightforward for him. He's quite slow, quite big and cumbersome. He's going to be there to hit for Joshua, and as we know, Joshua hits too hard. He's too sharp for someone like that to lap the distance. I'm just laughing at you. You look like you're looking through a little peephole or something. I'm zooming in.
It's the lighting in this house. I just see you.
One comment on Twitter or YouTube or something's got you paranoid about your lighting in your living room.
Is that what someone said?
I look like it was harsh, didn't they? Going from the intro to the.
I look like a ghost. I'm thinking, am I this white? Am I ill? Do I need a sunbed or something? Christ.
Like Kelly Pavlik, the ghost.
Got to sit with a heat lamp on us.
For those listening in audio, you're missing out on half the fun. Yeah, I don't know why we didn't go into video sooner.
You'll just see us glowing throughout the interview, just getting redder and redder by the end of the podcast. Anyway, sorry.
With all that in mind, just to finish off my point there, I think most are anticipating this is a fairly straightforward routine defense for Joshua. Obviously, we know how that's gone in the past. Andy Ruiz Jr. was the biggest, roundest banana skin in recent boxing history. And out of that, the Sky hype, the promotion, matchroom, whatever you want to call it, they've managed to generate a whole heap of interest in Joshua in building that rematch. They're getting rowdy in Saudi or whatever it was referred to as. I don't know if that was the official tagline.
Wasn't it like Clash on the Dunes or something?
Yeah, exactly. Nowhere near as catchy. That was it.
That should have been rowdy in Saudi.
It's interesting that's how much and sort of how well they did out of that event, because in theory, there's no way they'd have wanted Joshua to go over to America and lose to Ruiz, but it sort of presented them with a different opportunity, some way of having a sort of fresher outlook on Joshua and what he brings to that event, because since he won the world title, apart from the Klitschko fight, every fight has been pretty much the same in that it's been sold around Joshua, this guy who's the Olympic gold medal, world champion. He's been pay-per-view regardless of opponent since British title level, since the Dillian White fight. And considering how big he is in boxing and how much I love boxing, I haven't been that interested in the matchups. I'm interested in watching him and seeing how he does, but the opponents he's faced haven't done a massive amount for me, and that's again backhanded compliment because of how highly I rate him. Because I think he beats everyone in the world comfortably, apart from Fury, apart from potentially Deontay Wilder. So even though Pulev is probably a top 10 opponent, it doesn't do that much. And if you listen to Sky, they are now sort of going along the lines of, oh, well, it's as pivotal a moment for Joshua and AJ as the Ruiz fight and the Ruiz rematch. It's just important for him because if he doesn't win this, then the undisputed goes out the window and all the rest of it. But you could market that Joshua fighting anyone and have that same tagline attached.
I think that's only, to me, that's only true and sort of relevant if he fights Fury next, but then that's opening a whole other can of worms. He's touched on, he's like on his CV that there, it's not horrendous by any means. Do you know what I mean? Like there's some good names on there, like Klitschko and Povetkin, you know, others. But just going back to the fight itself, I think he touched on a good point there that I think this is the one, right, that you said it, and I think the same as you, and other people are saying it, that they think this could be the one that where he rolls back the gears and he knocks him out, and it's like that sort of come forward Joshua, like the aggressive Joshua, the brawler sort of thing. And I think in a sense it might have to be that way as well. And what I mean by that is if he struggles, or if it's unconvincing, or if, dare I say, it's boring, then it's just, I don't think it's going to do him any good, sort of perception-wise, because I think the yardstick now for the heavyweight division is Fury's sort of demolition job of Wilder 2, which was just like unbelievable, unreal. And I think if Joshua sort of falls beneath that again, with the doubts of the two Ruiz fights still being in people's heads and minds, and I'll say the doubts, all right, he answered some questions the second time round, but it wasn't a classic fight, and there was a lot of people that didn't enjoy that fight one bit. And but that's what I mean by the boring type of thing, like the vulnerabilities from the Ruiz 1, and then the sort of cagey boringness of Ruiz 2, followed up by another shaky, unconvincing one here against Pulev. I think, I don't know, just affects his standing a little bit, maybe in the public's eye. And I just think to sort of go into 2021 with a bit of momentum, and if people are really going to talk up the Fury fight, then I don't know, I think he needs to match him step by step. And going off Fury's last fight, that demolition job of Wilder, he needs to look good on Saturday. I think he needs to win and win well, and sort of get him out of their old school AJ style.
It's interesting you say like roll back the years, because he's only like it's in a weird way he's gone like all of 2020 through no fault of his own, and 2019 without a knockout win. You've got to go back to Povetkin for his last stoppage win.
Yeah.
But Ruiz, the rematch, is the only time he's ever gone the distance as a pro. And I think with all the fanfare and promotional push that he's had, if he hadn't done the business and wasn't knocking these guys out through every level that he's stepped up to, then the support he's got, the push that he's got, and the money he brings, everything about him, his profile, wouldn't be what it was. We've talked about like the value of knockouts when you're trying to build a fighter and big them up and promote them. And just delivered on that. And I think the Ruiz first fight, you can arguably sort of, put that down to, was he right going in? Like, he's been caught by a good shot. He's been outboxed, outlanded, and beaten up essentially. But, he regrouped. He showed there's more than one way to skin a cat. He played it safe. There's no doubt in that. But he did what he had to do, and he got the win against Ruiz. And it was almost like, despite doing that, he still hasn't answered a lot of the questions that people have, because the questions are around how he copes and what he does when he's not having things his own way. And on a lower scale, we talked about Daniel Dubois and building up that level, getting to a point where he's had some resistance essentially in the ring, and like the same with Anthony Yard last weekend. But with Joshua, we're talking at a much higher level, but there are still those sorts of questions. Like if Pulev can take what he's dishing out and push him and force him onto the back foot and make things uncomfortable for him, how does he respond then? And it seems a bit remiss to be sort of asking these questions, because Joshua showed that in patches against obviously Klitschko being the main one. But because he's lost to Ruiz and in the fashion he did, there's a lot of pressure on him, as I say, to perform well, and not necessarily to respond to these questions, but to come out and really dominate, really put it on Pulev, and essentially, as I say, get him out there, get the stoppage. I think personally he will do that.
Same.
Might be a bit cautious, easing his way into it, but once he sort of gets back in the ring, does off a bit of the ring rust and starts letting his hands go, realises he can hurt him again, like hurt someone again. So he didn't really hurt Ruiz in the rematch, but he's got that power, definitely. I think with Joshua, a lot of it is confidence, and this fight, while being enforced on him, could be the perfect tonic to boost his confidence. And as you say, going to 2021 with a bit more self-belief and head into that, hopefully, in the Fury fight. But leave that one and see it, I think.
No, I totally agree. Like you said, and like I said before about rolling back the years, and like you probably noticed on our Twitter this week, I was just doing a bit of digging down his box record. I guess surprised to see that he hasn't actually stopped anyone in the first 6 rounds since he blasted away Eric Molina in the third in 2016. So for someone who, the perception of a lot of fight fans is that, probably mostly, I guess, because of his sort of ascent to like maybe British sort of level, and maybe, and that Charles Martin fight, I guess, that he's some sort of destroyer, like as missile, as wrecking ball of a fighter. And actually, all right, when he does stop it tended to be later in recent years. So yeah, 4 years, you've got to go back December 2016, since he stopped someone in the first half of a fight, and that was Eric Molina. And I just think, and that leads us on to my next point about Pulev, really, and that's, 6 years ago now, Klitschko sort of brutally stopped him. 6 years ago, I think 2014. And it was pretty unlike Klitschko at the time. That wasn't really his style, but he really got aggressive in that fight and floored him, and it was quite a savage knockout. And Pulev was properly sparked out on the floor, just waved off. And I think that's 6 years ago, and I'm not sure of his age off the top of my head. Is he touching 40 now? The Bulgarian?
39 years now.
Aye. And that's what Klitschko was doing to him in 2014. It's now 2020 going into 21. So I guess, without sort of putting pressure on AJ, is that he's expected to get rid of him and do it in style, I think. And I think anything less than that on Saturday night will probably be looked at as a bit of a failure, I guess. I would fully expect the stoppage. I think it could be tailor-made for him, like you say, with that style he's got, with all his physical attributes and advantages. I think if he wants to get a stoppage, this is a bloody good chance to get one.
It's a bit of a lose-lose for him in that regard, then, because if he does go out and smash him to bits, you'll have the haters, the naysayers pointing out that he's nearly 40-year-old, he's long past his best. But again, I think in terms of a mandatory, we've seen a lot worse challengers enforced on champions in the past in different weight classes. And I think with Joshua, you've seen there about the early knockouts drying up. That's almost inevitable when you step up the levels. Like, you look at them in that body of work, like he hasn't got, apart from again Vlad Klitschko win, like a massive standout name on his record. And there's the debate about that version of Vlad against, like, compared to the one that Fury beat and how they beat him. Like, he got dropped, Fury didn't, but AJ stopped him, Fury didn't, and all the rest of it. But you look through the body of work, and I think I said earlier, like, Ruiz was the rematch, was the first time he'd gone distance. Obviously, that was the Joseph-Parker fight.
Yeah.
So there's the two he hasn't won by stoppage. But you look like to Parker, Povetkin, obviously what he's done to White since. Like, Ruiz, we sharing 2 fights with him. Even Carlos Takam at the time was like a decent name, like late replacement, I think. But he's consistently beaten like decent, good level of heavyweights, like not the elite in the sense of a Fury or a Wilder, but it's not like he's fighting nobodies. Like, he's fighting decent challengers. It's just because the high standards that you hold Joshua to, I think you look down almost at these other names because he hasn't fought like someone who is peer, essentially, someone you'd class and give a good shot of beating him. Every fight he's had, you favour Joshua going in, and probably partially because of the promotional push, and you think he's almost getting like the preferential treatment and the bit of favouritism going into all these fights, and home advantage and all these little things that add up to the boxer being the Lord himself saying it, the A side.
Yeah.
I think the likes of, again, Fury and Wilder, the only ones you'd see as being potentially 50-50. So if he's not fighting either of those, you automatically almost like subconsciously rule it as a bit of a negative, and that he's not really challenging himself. But outside of getting one of those names in, there's not a lot else he can do, and we've just got to hope that gets this Pulev one out of the way, and the Fury fight does happen. I mean, well, I'm not going to use this preview show to sit and talk about a fight that's not going to happen, but that's where ultimately where both guys are going to get judged. And
that's a good point.
I'm a big Fury fan, but I'm going to apply the same logic. Like, if he doesn't fight AJ next, I have relatively little interest in whoever he faces. Like, if he fought Dillian White or a Povetkin or whoever, like, it wouldn't have the same appeal to me as him getting in with AJ.
I know, and that's a whole new argument, and you could go into, well, there's a little bit more goodwill on Fury's side because he's fought Wilder twice. Do you know what I mean? And if you're going on like the holy trinity of the three big heavyweights, but then that's another discussion. And I just think, getting back to Saturday, I think when you touched on there about it being a lose-lose, and you know, if you go through the different scenarios, you think, right, AJ smashes them quick, say he smashes them in first, then you'll get the fucking disgrace, 26 quid for that. Oh God, you'll get that. But Pulev, why doesn't he just fight Fury? You know, so you've got that side of it. If he goes long and he goes points and it's unconvincing and it's a touch bore, and then it's, oh, shite him, that's three shite fights in a row. You know, so like 26 quid for that. Like, it is sort of lose-lose, no matter how he does it on Saturday, unless it's an absolute life and death war between the two of them. Like, he's going to get grief from all quarters, and I think that's the pedestal he's on, and that's the pedestal that Sky Sports box office and Matchroom would sort of give you. He's there to be shot at, and you know, no matter how he wins it on Saturday, and I'm assuming he will win it, he's probably going to get grief off some people. And like you say, until the big one's made, then you're not going to keep everyone happy, really. So, but
speaking of keeping everyone happy,
go on.
Can we have a look at some of the other highlights on the card?
I know. 2 seconds. I was just going to wrap it up. No, I was just going to say, I agree with what you said earlier, that Pulev's not by any means a disgraceful opponent. He's probably a top 10, at least definitely 100% a top 15 heavyweight. Mandatories are there for a reason, and it's, let's just see how it goes. But if you're asking for prediction, I'm going to stick me neck out, and I'm going to go AJ in the first 6 rounds at 6-4 odds. Let's roll back the years, AJ, and smash someone in the first half.
AJ round 7, I'm going to go just after.
Of course you would. I'll say what a 16 says. But let's, excuse me, we'll go further down the card, and obviously being 2020 in a pandemic and COVID, the cards took a couple of blows this past week. I guess the main blow was Lawrence Okolie's world title fight being called off due to COVID against Glowacki, and further down the card was an actually really decent fight for Kieran Conway against Suleiman Sissoko, another one of AJ's fighters, and pretty really good amateur back in his day. That's got called off as well. Luckily, they both got opponents still, and they're both on the card. But yeah, it has lost a little bit of depth and quality with those pullouts.
So talk about the highlights. You sound like you're going to do yourself in.
Highlights. No, I'm just. What are the highlights? Go on, tell me highlights.
I'm partly saying it tongue in cheek, but to be totally honest, like, yeah, the Okolie one's a big miss, because if you lose a world title fight from an undercard, that's obviously going to be a big impact in it on the overall quality of it. Like, him against Glowacki was a good fight, and from a viewing point of view, a bit gutted about that. I'm a bit gutted for Lawrence as well, because he had a massive chance here to really show what he's all about. He's still got the chance to do that to a certain extent, but he's obviously not going to get the same reward. Yeah. He's not going to get the same recognition for winning on Saturday night. I think, in all seriousness, the highlight of the card is potentially going to be Bakoli and Kuzmin. Martin Bakoli, Kuzmin fight. Another heavyweight bout propping up Joshua. I think in terms of entertainment, that's probably going to be one of the best fights, if not the best fight on the undercard. Fairly evenly matched. Both men have only lost to Michael Hunter. So in terms of pitching two fighters of a similar level at a decent level as well, at a good solid skill set between them, it should prove to be fun for as long as it lasts. I think the heavyweights is always an issue of will it go the distance? There's always that question, a bit of intrigue in that sense. And if Bucoli is what we're led to believe and what he's made out to be, this could be a bit of a breakout fight for him in front of a big audience, get a chance to secure a really impressive win. And if, again, similar to what we talked about with AJ, if he does it in good style, if he does it in a dominant fashion, then you're looking at him being launched into the next tier of heavyweight boxers, like pushing in towards, not necessarily getting into, but pushing towards the top 10 and really sort of making himself unavoidable. Because at the minute, he seems to be a bit of a big risk, low reward for a lot of fighters out there.
No, and it is a very good fight, and I think that's the fight that's sort of hinging the sort of undercard together at the minute. And I think without that one, it would be getting a lot more pelters than it's been getting this week. It's one of those heavyweight fights that people, that caliber of fights that people have like been asking for, where we've touched on it many times now, I think on our shows, Andrew, that there's beneath your Joshua and Furies, there's probably 12 to 15 sort of similar type of contenders. I won't name them all again, but there's a bloody lot of them that are just there to be matched up in either 50-50 fights like this or some sort of tournament format or something. And yeah, it's a mid one. It's an easy one for Matthew to make. Kuzman's no stranger to people over here. From fighting Dillian Price, Dillian White and David Price hybrid. David Price.
Chin had one out of those two.
I know. He was a good amateur as well. I think, didn't he beat Joe Joyce back in the day, Kuzman? But hasn't maybe hit the height in the pros that people have thought he would. And I think Saturday for him is that fight that if he doesn't win this, he'll probably become one of those sort of heavyweights for hire. Like sort of Povetkin wasn't a bit, or Takam was for a bit, and get them over. Do you know what I mean? He's always good value, but he might probably get beat. So it is a really good fight. Bucoli, I think, like you said before, they've both lost to Michael Hunter, and I think Bucoli's probably stands out to more people maybe in this country just because he sort of came apart of the seams that night. I'm sure it was on Channel 5 back in the day. And for whatever reason, you put it down to a bad night in the office. I'm sure Billy Nelson's mentioned it before as trainer that things were going on around the fight and stuff. And that just leaves that little chink of doubt in my head that should he be a 3-1 on favourite? I don't know. Like you say, he gets a lot of hype, and I think he's been one of AJ's chief sparring partners, main sparring partners for many years now. He's got a very vocal trainer on social media in Billy Nelson, who truly believes in his talent and, he's convinced that he's a future star and a future world champion. So I think that's a cracking fight. I find it hard to predict. I know you're strongly in favour of Bucoli for that one. I'm not too sure, but I'm looking forward to it. I don't think it'll go the full distances. So whatever odds you get on fight not to go the distance, just lump on that. I think someone's going down there. Sorry, when I was a bit sad and solemn about the undercard before, that one had slipped my mind. So that's a crack.
All right, I'll be the positive one and then remind you all the good times.
Makes a change, yeah. Right, undercard.
I'll run through the other fights. I did make a couple of notes on them.
Yeah.
Huey Fury and Marius back. Again, that's sort of the other heavyweight one on the card. But if you've ever seen Huey Fury, he's not your stereotypical heavyweight. He bombs away, going to throw recklessly, expecting to jab and box and move, and back like that sort of is what you just talked about, a heavyweight for hire almost. He's not really going to enhance Fury's resume too much, despite probably being one of the better names in it. Huey's not necessarily going to get a lot of credit unless he goes in and blows them out. I think he should win comfortably, probably wide on points in this one.
Yeah.
Can't see Vac having too much to bother him. He's not going to push a pace that Huey's uncomfortable with, and that'll suit him down to the ground. He'll made some noises, and Peter Fury's been the same about how it's like a new and improved Huey, a bit more aggressive. He's going to be a bit busier, a bit more on the front foot. And again, like if that happens, then brilliant. It'll be a more entertaining spectacle. But I anticipate more of the same in the sort of cautious, safety first, very technical display from Huey. And as I say, like you'll win most of the rounds for me, and wide on points would be my prediction.
I can't argue with anything you've said there. Again, you hear the noises, you hear them from Huey. I'm going to take him out there. I'm going to do that, and I just think it's just not. I don't think it's his style. It's not naturally his style. We know exactly how Peter Fury's fighters box, and I just think Leopard probably can't change his spot. It's probably not the best analogy because he had a skin condition for many years, but.
Oh, partridge. Okay, now.
No partridge that. Anyway, I just think, like Huey, actually, I'm not a hater of him. Like, he's all right, he's not the most entertaining at times, but, he's fought some good names in his young career, and, Povetkin, Joseph Parker. Like you say about Wack, I think, if he's not beating him and he's not beating him well, then questions will probably have to start being asked. But I can't see there being many issues from Saturday night. He's fought Pulev as well, actually, out in Bulgaria. So he doesn't really duck anyone here. He's fought some decent names. And they've obviously another trainer and father in this instance that truly believes in his talent. And maybe we're just yet to see the best of him. But I think he'll win well. I'll stick with points on that one. I think I'd be pretty hesitant to put any decent money on a Huey Fury stoppage win. So no points for me.
And then a couple of others on the undercard of the COVID cancellation bouts being rearranged. You mentioned Kieran Conway before. He does have an opponent, and on paper it's a similarly level matched one. You've got Conway 15 wins, 1 loss, 1 defeat, and Macaulay McGowan 14 wins, 1 loss, and 1 defeat. So in terms of what we ask for a lot of the time, and you like these domestic sort of trade fights where you're matching 2 similar level fighters, got no issue with that one, especially as it wasn't the original bout. Not going to appeal to the wider viewer necessarily, but tough one to call, could be fairly entertaining.
I think a slight caveat for that for me is that Macaulay McGowan was in a very, very, very hard fight literally a month ago, where he basically got a pasting for 10 rounds against Kulatmet, the outstanding sort of Kazakh, and only his second pro fight in one of the MTK shows, and he literally got pasted around the ring for 10 rounds. He should have really been pulled in hindsight, or stopped. It wasn't, and he just got battered, and that was a month ago. So, and I think
anticipating that having an impact then.
I think it could be. A few eyebrows were raised on Twitter. I sort of took a neutral ground and was like, I'm surprised he's back in this quick, but his handlers and his team must have obviously signed it off and have faith that he's okay, and he's right. But I just think, honestly, he was just beaten up. It was just a beatdown for 10 rounds, and that was a month ago. Is that out your system, or are you fully recovered?
Potentially looked at Kieran Conway and thought he's not the biggest puncher naturally, so maybe it's one that can get away with in that regard.
Possibly, but I think it might just depend on how McGowan sort of starts and grows into the fight. If he's sort of again getting beaten, taking a bit of a bad one, with that in mind so recently, and sports like these days about sort of safety and head injuries and different type of things, will it just be on the corner's mind or people's mind that it was only a month ago that he was getting a good hiding? So, as I say, it's a last-minute opponent. It's obviously been signed off by everyone, the appropriate officials, board, people, trainer, manager, matchroom. So he's there, and fair play to him, like he's a game lad, But going on what I've seen, which is no slight on his ability, because he was fighting an outstanding kid, the Kazakh lad, and I just think, I think it's Conway will win that. I think just because of, partly because of that sort of beating he took about a month ago. So I've got a favour Conway there, possibly by stoppage over even money. I think that's 7-4. As I say, just with them little doubts in the mind of folk about the sort of condition of McGowan.
And then another name on everyone's lips is that of Florian TNT Marku, former kickboxer turned pro boxer. Seems to have he's had 7 fights so far, and he seems to have had that many opponents lined up this week.
Yeah.
Before finally getting a fight sealed and done. I mean, he's one who I've heard a fair bit about. One of my friends sort of was aware of him from kickboxing days, and when he found out he turned over to boxing, he was sort of, oh, you need to watch him, you need to keep an eye on him, and you know, one for the blog to interview and all the rest of it. And I was like, oh yeah, you know, sort of, you know, you hear these sorts of things quite a fair bit, don't you? But then he turned over, I believe, or he started some of his earlier fights with Steve Goodwin down in London and was like selling out York Hall on his own by all accounts. So obviously brings that huge popularity, and it's no surprise to see S-Jam and Matchroom tempted by him and willing to take that punt. Like, all action, heavy hands, big fan base. He's exactly what the bigger promoters are looking to the small hall to try and up essentially and build on.
Totally agree. I'd heard a lot, mainly from Sam Jones, but I'd heard a lot about him. The first time I see him was on the recent Ultimate Boxer sort of undercard. He fought no one outstanding, but he won well. And League, you just tick the boxes there. Like, Albanian but lives in the UK, massive Albanian fan base, like all action style, can knock people out. All right, they've been of a sort of lower caliber, but he talked well in his interview after, and I was just watching it all. I was like, that he ticks every box of you in a transition, like you say, from small hall to bigger promoter to arenas, whatever. Then I was a fully fledged up member of the fan club after that fight. I thought, I like him, I like everything about him, and no surprise that he's followed Lerone Richards from, like, you know, S-Jam management to sign for Matchroom, sort of cements that close relationship that they've got at the minute. And again, you know, he's had an opponent fall through. He's fighting Jamie Stewart, who eagle-eyed observers, well, he was the one that beat Mick Hennessy's son on one of Hennessy Sports recent shows. He was the one that beat
Mick Hennessy, is that?
He was the one that beat Mick Hennessy Jr. That's him. That's Jamie Stewart. He was the late replacement for Fearon. Obviously, there was mentions on social media about Chris Congo maybe getting the gig, but I don't think that's ever going to happen at such short notice. But that is definitely a fight for 2021. Again, he's one of those names that we mentioned after probably the Conor Bench show the other week. That domestic mix in that division is pretty tantalising for next year, hopefully. So I look forward to seeing him again. I don't envisage he'll have too many problems with Stewart, but yeah, one for people to keep an eye on if they've never seen him before.
Earlier on, during one of your little comments, you mentioned the V word, value. You weren't specifically talking about the show in general, but what are you going to be spending your money on this Saturday? Are you going to be buying the show, or are you going to be ordering a Chinese and a few beers?
As soon as I seen Sam Jones's that little snippet, I think it was from Seconds Out the other day, I was just like, no, that's like Eddie Hearn rule book number 1, isn't it? You know, 2 fighters have just gone to Matchroom, and it's like, right, what you have to say this week, Sam, is this, and it's like, oh, the Chinese and few beers, it just makes you want to like fucking blow your brains out. It's just tiresome, that argument. Like, the last 2 pay-per-views, am I allowed to say this? I haven't paid for. I watched one I was in hospital, one I was in the QE gated watching Chisora Usyk on a sort of dodgy phone stream with Ukrainian commentary, and the other one I use my IPTV. I know there's no, you know, which isn't really working very well at the minute. So I've got a decision to make. It's either find a new IPTV provider or pay the money. And you know, it's tricky. It is tricky. Like you know me, I watch out. Like Christ, and I do want to watch it on Saturday night.
No, you can't stick it on Carol's bill now, can you?
No, I can stick my mother's bill now. I'm out now. It's you know, I don't want to sound like a Sky Sports or Matchroom apologist or something, but it's a decent day of sport on Saturday for, you know, we're tier 3 up here. Do you know, we haven't got the option of doing anything for it really. It's going to be in our houses. you've got Newcastle at 3, you've got Man United 5:30. I did say decent, but forget the Newcastle bit. And then you've got Joshua later on. You know, so sometimes it's easy just to whack your pin number in your remote and just order it and forget about it until your next bill. I do think it's steep. I do, honestly, I think it is steep. Sometimes you think, do these... I don't know, because then it gets into the whole financial aspect of boxing, and you know me thoughts on getting too deep into that. But yeah, it's been a tough year, and the need to go over that price point, it's been a tough year for like the country and morale-wise and everything. Could they have just sort of, you know how like Frank put Dubois Joyce on free to wear? Could they have went for like a £10 price point, like something a bit lower, you know? But
I think that would have generated a lot of goodwill, and it is the season for that after all. But ultimately, it comes down to that pound note, doesn't it? That he's self-owned, I don't know, admits to chasing, like, and he's not alone in that. We've said before, and again, it sounds like we're sort of defending Matchroom just for the sake of it, but I don't think he's any different from any other promoter in that regard. They're all after the money. They're all in it to earn as much as possible. And I think because of how successful and how popular Matchroom are with the more casual fan, that almost directly correlates into more hate and more criticism from the self-proclaimed hardcore fans. It's almost trendy amongst them to be anti-Matchroom and to pick up on everything Hearn says and to comb through all his interviews and pull together the clips where he's contradicting himself weeks apart. And it frustrates me as a fan. I see both sides of it, but ultimately what it comes down to is, do they think they can, for want of a better phrase, get away with it? Like, will enough people pay to make it worth their while? And obviously they'll have brains behind them and like all the projections and the previous numbers and who's paid for it and who's paid for all the other previous ones. Are they likely to come again? And there'll be all these sorts of calculations and workings out going into it. And fair play to Rob Tebbit, who interviewed Adam Smith a while ago, a few weeks ago was, and really grilled him on that price point, like wouldn't let him away with it. And he's almost watching him squirm as he got a bit aggressive, a bit prickly, Smith, trying to sort of explain the reasoning. And the reasoning is... What
was his reasoning then? I didn't watch that, but I did see that page.
There was a couple of points, to be honest. One was basically, this Robert sort of alluded to, was they said for the Joshua Ruiz match, it was going to be a sort of one-off at 25 quid because it was the rematch. There was massive hype around it. They believed that it was going to do the biggest numbers of like any sort of UK pay-per-view, and you know, if the man who sparked Joshua out, it's a chance for a repeat or revenge. And like any rematch, when there's been an upset, sort of sells because there's that element of jeopardy. And I understand that one, and I actually paid for that. Like, I was like, I'm not risking a dodgy stream going down. It's a fight I've genuinely wanted to see.
Yeah.
I've talked about not being massively interested in Joshua's opponents previously, but because I'd seen this lad beat Joshua, you think, yeah, it's a legit fight. Like, you can definitely see it going either way. You can make a case for both men winning that one. So I was well up for that, paid the 25 quid just for the main event, didn't really care what was on the undercard, except much at all anyway. But then he sort of tried to say that this one was just as big an event and just as important for AJ and as pivotal in his career. And at that point, I was thinking, well, that's not really true. Like, in the sense of any fight Joshua has is obviously important for his career. If he loses this, then the Fury fight goes out the window. But that's the same case as we've had for the last 2 or 3 years with Joshua. So to me, it's not on the same level as an event or as a fight or as interesting as the Ruiz rematch. So from that point of view, that's when I started to sort of lose a little bit of interest and thinking, yeah, like, I'm not really going to pay the 25 quid for that. And we've already mentioned like the undercard falling apart to a degree. And it's not one I'm like really wanting to focus on and to... It's hard to say this openly and honestly without being really, really negative, because when you look at it from however you want to look at it, I don't personally see it as being value for money. Like, you can listen to the promoters saying it's only the price. It used to just be a price of a few beers, but they've thrown a Chinese on top now because the price has gone up.
Well,
like, I don't understand why this is worth more, other than the Joshua name, than like the 20 quid I paid the other week for Vetkin White or whatever it was, or like the couple of pay-per-views I have paid for recently, and like it's tough because without going into the whole economic climate of the country at the minute, which like we can do because that undoubtedly has an impact and a bearing on people's opinions of it. You mentioned, like, you know what I mean, like countries on its arse, like could they not have even just stuck to 20 quid or 15 quid? Like, did they really have to try and go for that extra £5? But they'll be looking at it from the point of view as well. Normally we'd be selling out Wembley at 90,000. We're 89,000 down on attendance. We need to try and regroup some of that money somehow. Yeah. And the fact that a lot of the country are on 80% of their normal wages isn't really relevant to them. They're going to be hoping and expecting to do decent numbers on 25 quid, whether that's come from Sky, Matchroom, AJ, combination of the three. It's tough. Like, you've just got to look at it on its merits and judge it for yourself. Like, do you think it's worth that? And ultimately, for me, it's not. And we've talked about other means of watching it now. That's an interesting point, because if it were pay 25 quid or not see it ever, would that then change your viewpoint? Potentially, yes. You'd be sitting there thinking, well, I just want to watch some boxing. But the realistic situation is that there are other options available, and you can argue the morals of those and whether you should be doing that, whether it's morally right or wrong. But ultimately, boxing fans, like any other person, you look after yourself, don't you? There is a selfish element to it. And
absolutely.
I think COVID's highlighted that. Like, you want to look after your family, you want to look after those close to you, and close in ranks almost.
Well, like you say, like obviously, like I said before, we're still tier 3 up here in the northeast, Gateshead, Newcastle, County Durham, whatever. Like, we haven't even got the option to go around your mates and chuck a £5 in each, and you buy it, we'll give you. You know what I mean? Like, so you haven't even got that option up here. So yeah, it's tricky, like, because like one of the things I love doing during these lockdowns and tier systems and all that is watching the boxing on a weekend, like, because I know I'm going to be in for it, and like I've never probably watched as much boxing in my life. It's always on, and like I know Saturday night I'll want to watch it, but then like I want to talk to you about it on Sunday and do these shows, and like when you do a boxing blog or whatever we are, boxing whatever media thing, then you sort of want to know what you're talking about, like doing a podcast for you on Sunday. Oh, did you see it? Nah, read about it. You know what I mean? And you're like, well, you look stupid already. So you're trying to absorb
more as much than normal.
Well, exactly. And you're trying to absorb as much boxing as you can. And like, I do want to watch it. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to be reading about it on Twitter. I do want to watch boxing on Saturday night, which is another argument. It's like, well, then you're a mug because you'll just pay for anything. What next? Paying for Tommy, you go to Tommy Frank in your car. You know what I mean? Like, so
I spare 400 quid, eh?
Yeah, we'll come on to that in a minute. It's just it is a massive argument. Like, it's a massive debate. And,
like, going back to what you said was the sort of Eddie Hearn playbook of Sam Jones saying, like,
a few beers in the Chinese.
Yeah, like I genuinely don't get that argument at all, because the previous one was, oh, you go down the pub for a few pints, or you go out for a night out or whatever, and you pay like 4 times that. It's like, yeah, but they're totally unrelated for me. Like, there's no correlation between me going on a night out with my mates and paying for the boxing. Like, I don't understand what the relevance is. Like, are they saying, don't go out on that night out and spend your 100 quid, stay in and watch the boxing instead, and like you save yourself some money? Because like, if I've arranged to go on a night out for my friend, with my mates or whatever, I'm not going to cancel that to sit in and watch the boxing. Like, I'm out and I'll catch up on it the next day or whatever, but then I've got to spend that 20 quid or whatever it may be on top of me night out to watch it again on the Sunday. And the same with the Chinese. Like, are they suggesting that you do without a Chinese takeaway one night this week and then you can watch the boxing? It's like, well, totally different impulses. Like, if anything, I'm going to sit in on a Saturday night, order a Chinese, and want to watch the boxing, like, and then I've spent 50 quid.
It's expensive, man. Being a sports fan, and it's watching sport is expensive. Like, look at the kickback football's just got for pay-per-view, and thankfully it was sort of cancelled because it was an absolute shit show of an idea, really. Paying for West Brom and Burnley and stuff like that. Do you know what I mean? And at least they sort of listened there, and maybe Matchroom and Sky and that have missed a bit of a trick, especially with, like I said before, about Dubois, Joyce being free to wear and stuff. Like, maybe he's just lowering that price point to 15, a tenner. Stay humble and all that stuff. Would have maybe got, as pretty much the nation's flagship boxer, which he's still a massive, massive deal. Could they have just thought about it a bit more about it? And, the sort of it's the last major, UK-based boxing match of the year. Could they have done something a little bit marketing outside the box?
On the contrary of what you've just said, you say like Matchroom and Sky maybe potentially missed a trick, which I do agree with to a certain degree. But do you think that football have missed a trick in the way they marketed and the way they introduced their pay-per-view system? Because what they've done is they've kept all of the big attractive matches on normal Sky, which obviously you're paying a massive amount for anyway. Most people are like to get the full Sky package and what have you. And then you've got your like West Brom, Sheffield United, etc. on pay-per-view as like extra content. That's like boxing having AJ on normal Sky, and then you like next gen on pay-per-view. Like you wouldn't do that. Like if Sky was serious about pay-per-view football, they'd have the likes of West Brom, West Ham, and I'll chuck Newcastle in there as well, that aren't going to get the neutrals particularly interested on your Super Sunday fixtures. And then Liverpool, Man City rolls around, that's your pay-per-view fixture, right? You're paying 50. You want to watch the big teams, you pay 15 quid. And in terms of supply and demand, that's how they would make their money. And they do better numbers for the pay-per-view than they would what they've tried to sort of introduce and get up and running with the football so far. I'm not for 1 minute saying that's what I would like to see, but it's totally backwards in the sense of like, yes, you can argue the quality of boxing pay-per-view shows, but the general consensus is the biggest and best fighters are the ones on pay-per-view.
Well, I'd say
compared to what you don't necessarily want to watch that you could sit and do without.
It's mental. Like if you pay for everything, if you like paid for Sky Sports, BT Sport, like which we do, but then if you put Premier Sports on, you put La Liga TV on, you then pay for, well, obviously that would come for Brooke Crawford, but then you paid for like Tyson Jones, and you pay, you like, I guess something has to give, and it's probably has give for a lot of people. You go on Twitter now and like you search Joshua-Pulev box office or TV or something, you'll see a shitload of IPTV things. Do you know what I mean? Like whether you agree with the morals of a dodgy boxer, a dodgy fire stick, whatever, like they're there. Do you know what I mean? They're in the market, and like people.
Yeah, one of the arguments against that or to that, whatever, is obviously then you're taking money out of the fighter's pocket.
Yeah.
And again, you are. Like, there's no way around that. Yeah. But I would feel more comfortable taking 25 quid out of Joshua's pocket than like the small hall fighter, for example, who needs that profile, like they need that push. Like I feel more comfortable sitting here saying that because I know the graft we put in to try and promote the small hall scene, particularly in the Northeast, but the interviewing boxers, giving them a platform, and like it is partly for us as well. We obviously enjoy doing it. That's one of the main reasons. But also, like we've paid to go to small hall shows. We've bought tickets direct from fighters, and it doesn't really hit home with the average man on the street, that Joshua is getting paid X amount of million instead of like a million less or a couple of million less out of his purse. Like, as you say, why couldn't they have all, and it's not a dig on Anthony Joshua, it's everyone, like why could they not have taken a little bit of a hit? And like, again, in terms of my conscience, I've got no issue streaming it or watching it through other means, because ultimately it's not having that big an impact on Joshua.
I guess it comes down to like, I guess we're all to blame in a way. We've over the years we've done it, we've paid for it, and it's allowed them to put fights like this on pay-per-view and worse fights than this. And to me, it comes down to what is pay-per-view anyway. I think of it as like an American term for like the massive. It should be for the massive mega fights. Do you know what I mean? Like there should be 1 a year, 2 a year. Fury Joshua, I'll pay 30 quid, whatever. But I don't know. I wish it would go back to that where it was just mega like the fucking nation stops and tunes in and like it's just huge. It's Lennox Lewis's. You know what I mean? Like it's. I just wish pay-per-view was reserved only for boxing's mega fights, but I guess that ceiling's been well and truly smashed. And it's
it has. In one of the counterpoints is like they say, these fights can't get made without pay-per-view, and it's like, well, if that's the case, then the fighters get. And I feel harsh saying it, like the fighters are getting paid too much in that sense, and I'm not. I don't like saying that because it obviously sounds like I'm shitting on the fighters who are putting their lives on the line. It's a dangerous sport, etc., etc. But that's the case at small hall level. That's the case for journeymen up and down the country every weekend. And it'd be interesting to see how many of these people who pay pay-per-view just so Dillian White or Derek Chisora can earn 4 million quid instead of 2 million quid or whatever, actually would put the hand in their pocket for something like lower down the pyramid. See, we tried to raise a bit of money for Kevin McCauley and did brilliantly, raised over 200 quid for like a boxing journeyman going through a bit of a hard time. But to then, to many fans, like they weren't interested in that, and like that's their prerogative. But like that's a fighter who, if your argument is that you want to make sure fighters are all right, they put their life on the line, they deserve a few quid, that was a brilliant opportunity for you to put your hand in your pocket and give a few quid rather than popping up the multimillionaire's purse. Like, if, for example, for me personally, if Usyk Chisora wasn't on pay-per-view and therefore wasn't made, I wouldn't have been bothered in the slightest. It wasn't a fight that I was particularly looking forward to. It turned out to be a decent fight. It was all right. You know what I mean? Better than I expected.
Yeah.
But it's not one that I was like over the moon was made or felt boxing, like, you know, it would have been a real shame if it didn't get made. If it didn't get made, Chuck Usyk and Joshua or something like.
Well, that comes back to what I was saying. That's the sort of dangerous territory we're now in, where contenders, and that's all they are. That's all Usyk is, Chisora is, Dillian White is, just contenders in our pay-per-view. Do you know what I mean? They're just heavyweight contenders.
And this is where it comes back to what we're saying about Sky pitching it, and they're looking at the figures, they're looking at the stats that back up their decision. Will we make enough money? Like, if it's not on pay-per-view, there's no gate. We need to try and recoup some of it. It's better for a few 100,000 people to pay 15, 20 quid or whatever that one was than not, and just have it on mainstream Sky and get more people watching, because let's be honest, in terms of the long-term future, that's not going to be Chisora necessarily. They don't have any vested interest in building him and getting as many eyes on him as possible. They want to make as much money for him and from him in the next year or so that they can before he retires.
Well, that's it. And, you know, like you say, people have different sort of priorities. And, like you say, putting money back into boxing, try getting our mates to buy a ticket for a small hall show, 35 quid. You know what I mean? They wouldn't, it's, you know, people feel priced out of that market. If we try and get our mates to come along to the Lancastrian Suite or the Eagles Arena, 35 quid. Who the hell are all these on this bill? Do you know what I mean? And people have different ways of wanting to spend their money when it comes to boxing. People would rather, you know, shell out watching AJ Pulev than they would go into a night of boxing. And I don't know. I know we've waffled on here for a bit about it, and
I felt we were going on a bit there, but it's something that people like to hear about and like to discuss. To be honest, I don't have the answers, we don't generally give our opinion on too much, because like, ultimately what we just said there in a long-winded way was, like, if you feel it's worth it, then you pay your money. And
like anything in life,
it is, and this is the thing, it comes down to anything in life, and obviously those promoting it, those set to earn from it, are going to try and convince you that it is worth it, and you've got to try and look through that with any advertising, any gimmick. Like, how many adverts do you see for things, and like clothes, for example, like how much do you spend on clothes, or it's a certain brand or whatever. Like, for example, again, there's a brand. But like as an example, right? Like our mates fairly regularly actually in WhatsApp group take the piss out of each other's trainers and what you like and what you pay for trainers and that.
Yeah.
But seriously, right? Like if you pay, for example, for like Gucci trainers, like would you pay £400 for a pair of trainers?
No.
And that's partially because of.
I'd probably pay. Let me, you know, I'd probably pay up. Sort of, I get towards 100 marks sometimes with Adidas and stuff like that, but not.
And that's what I mean. Like,
you know what I mean?
And you think, oh well, no, actually, like that. Like no trainer's worth £400. That's ridiculous. Like whatever. Like, or it's like, well, I would, but I can't really afford that. I can't justify paying that. So like, I'm not going to. And then, as you say, you still pay like £100 or whatever. So it's not necessarily what that trainer is worth, because I dare say you could go to Primark or wherever, get yourself a pair of trainers to do the same job or a similar job, but for whatever reason you feel it's worth it to pay that £100 for Adidas trainers. Yet no,
I'm one of the biggest.
It's the same for same for boxing. Surely, if I look at what I pay per month, like if it was just £25 for Joshua and that's all I was paying for this month to watch the boxing, right? Yeah, pay that. But then like the argument is, and again we talked about that you look at your Sky bill or whatever, like pay. I'm slightly different. We got our TV and stuff through BT and internet and that, but like we're paying about 80-90 quid for BT internet. All comes obviously as a package, BT Sport, and then 30 quid for Now TV, the Sky Sports package. So we get 11 channels for that. But out of those 11 channels, I watch 3. Like, if you look at obviously DAZN coming in, potentially is in the UK, you're paying £1.99 a month. Now, if I was paying that, if I was paying £2 for every Sky channel, every Sky Sports channel I watch, I'd be paying £6 a month. Add on BT Sport 1 and 2, say. There's a tenner a month I'm spending on sports channels where I feel I'll be getting my money's worth. Whereas with BT and Sky, I'm paying a lot more. Obviously, with BT, don't really get that many more channels that I wouldn't get on Freeview, to be honest, apart from the sports ones.
Yeah.
But we sort of tied into it, so it's like we make that commitment every month, and we're in a contract, and you're like, well, like, yeah, because I can't do without the boxing, essentially, the football or the F1. Like, if it was up to, if I had the choice, I wouldn't be paying that. I'd be paying for what I watch, but
exactly.
Not the case, is it? So you almost, your hands are tied.
I paid a bloody tenner to watch Marku v Newcastle man, the League Cup earlier in the season. You know, so if you talk about sporting mugs and paying more money, you know, I was on that stream, I follow and all that, and logging in on the smart telly and that, just to watch Newcastle put 6 or 7, whatever it was, past Billy Morgan. So, you know, we all do it in a way. But in answer to your question, which is probably half an hour ago, am I paying for it? Am I not this weekend? At this point, I don't know. It's up to me to then sort it out. I do want to watch it, but by what means? TBC.
Well, talking of means, there's a show on Friday night, I believe, where if you want, you can part with £400 of your own hard-earned cash, drive your little Clio down to Sheffield and pull up next to the ring and watch the straightener in the car park.
Is that legit? Is it really £400? What's the crack here? £400 a car?
I heard it on Boxing Time last week. Our little pal Ozzy Smith couldn't believe it. Actually, I was listening to today, their show from last Sunday, but I was catching up. Right. And I found the fight poster then. It was for the front 2 rows in your car, £400 a car. Rows further back, 300, and then I think it had private pods, which I'm not entirely sure what that consists of, but they were priced on application.
Right.
Like, I'm not being funny, but I had 5 people in my car, like you said before, like that's about 80 quid a pop to watch a small hole show. And I think, again, it comes down to what the promoter feels he can get away with. Dennis Hobson in this case, like what can he charge that's going to recoup his losses, essentially, because you can't pack the place out using the ticket sellers to pack the place out with 1,000 people or hundreds of people, a couple of thousand people, whatever, that you normally would. So they've got to be like a bit inventive, and I think part of me is applauding it, because apart from that, the small hole scene in the UK is pretty much dead at the moment, because the model is so reliant on just getting as many people into a venue as possible. As you said before, paying minimum 35, 40 quid a ticket. The responsibilities on the boxers to shift those tickets. We've said before, small old boxers who don't sell tickets don't box, or they don't box as the home fighter anyway.
Well, that's it.
When no one can ship tickets, the playing field's been leveled, but to a point where it's been flattened.
It is clever in a way. Like, it reminds us of up here earlier in the lockdown. If you remember, we had, I think Newcastle was like the first city to do it. We had those gigs at Gosforth Racecourse, and it was like, you know, Libertines, Van Morrison, like a few big names and that played there. Sam Fender and that, and like it was sort of like not a driving gig because you didn't sit in your car, but you had to drive up to the gates, like, you know, in either a taxi or a car. You would get your slot, you would get a car parking space, you would get your own pen or pod with you and your bubble on that, and it was like a socially distanced, spaced out sort of gig. And it reminds us, you know, this whole
kind of spaced out gig.
Aye, reminds us a bit of that. You know, like, I guess fair play. Like, Tommy Frank needs fights as much as anyone, you know, like, and the undercard as well. I think there's quite a few fights on there. It is on Eurosport if people do want to watch that tomorrow. I know Dave Allen's doing a bit of guest punditry on that. It's on the telly, you know, and boxing, like, how many other small hold promoters have been out? And I'm classing Dennis Hobson as one of them, like, loosely, even though he's had pretty success over the years with sort of leading people to world titles and things like that. But he is, you know, he's one of the smaller promoters in the sport. But
small hold model, definitely.
I put fair play, like, apart from MTK, none of them's been out. Like, Goodwin hasn't, we haven't been out up here, none of, like, Jeffries and all that.
And so again, MTK in their own sort of bracket there in terms of how well financed they are, because they don't necessarily need to rely on, like we just said there, the boxers shifting the tickets. Like, how many small hold promoters do you speak to where they're just about breaking even from a show because they just want to get their lads out there in boxing and get them the opportunities. That they're not in it for the money, but in the same vein, they're not in a position to sink money into it without any chance of getting it back.
Well, he's done something different. Like I said, he's secured TV rights for it. Eurosport took it. Like, Tommy Frank's on his own little journey without fighting any of the real sort of UK big names in that division. He's on his own little march up the international route, I guess. It's on the telly, and fair play to Dennis Hobson for, like, I guess, thinking outside the box. And for those that do go, I'd be, if anyone follows us that's going, I'd quite like to hear about it, and, you know, let us know how your sort of night goes. And again,
wrap up home.
Wrap up, get your heaters on in your car. But for folk that like a bit of boxing, and I'm sure Eurosport's a Freeview channel these days or whatever, it's on. And there's also other boxing on terrestrial tomorrow night, 10 p.m. Channel 5. That's Sam Eggington headlining against Ashley-Theophane. Bit of a blast from the past there. One of our very, very early interviews for British Boxing Blog, he was. Former Mayweather promotions fighter. But that's Channel 5 tomorrow.
Off his car.
Yeah, that's Eggington's second fight of the whole pandemic lockdown thing. He obviously had that good fight with Ted Cheeseman earlier in the year. I know a lot of folk think Eggington will be maybe a bit too fresh, a bit too strong for the Eggington-Theophane tomorrow night. This fight I'm looking forward to, actually. But do you go along with that assessment?
I think he'd be too strong, hit too hard, and set too relentless a pace. I don't remember seeing actually Theophane box that much in the last few years. He got stopped off Adrian Broner, I think, at one point. He's obviously much higher level than Eggington, but again, he's the older man. I don't think he's necessarily got the power or the movement necessarily to keep Eggington off. Eggington has shown in the past he can be outboxed, he can be hit, and he can certainly be hit, and he can definitely be out-thought in there by someone who maybe a bit more fleet-footed than he is. But I don't think Theophane at this point in 2020 is the one to do that.
Theophane's record
breaks it down and will stop him late, I think.
The Broner fight you mentioned was 2016. Since then, he's fought in Vegas, he's fought in Germany, he's fought in Budapest, Accra, Ghana, he's fought in Poland, he's fought Tijuana, Mexico, Dubai.
He's building on Twitter, and he's doing a little bit of a world tour.
Dubai, Romania, Denmark, and now he's back in the UK for his first fight since, I'm going to tell you this, 2012, when he lost to Darren Hamilton for the British super lightweight title. So there you go. And I guess it could be, didn't Eggington blast Malignaggi out there towards the end of Malignaggi's days? And it could be very similar in that Theophane's, he's cute, he's got all the moves, but maybe that age and sort of resistance might just betray him tomorrow night.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned Eggington being too fresh. I don't think anyone would describe Eggington as being
I know, fresh is probably the wrong way.
Towards himself, but I get what you're saying, because I think the Cheeseman fight, he showed he's still got a lot to give, and that may have taken a bit more out of him ultimately, but he was very competitive in that, to give it a good go, and if he performs at that level against Theophane, he should get him out of there mid to late rounds. I think towards the end of the fight might be sort of a mercy stoppage after an accumulation of punches.
There's a Midlands area title on that undercard as well. I'm sure Casey Benjamin's on. However, I don't know where the undercard's available to watch. I don't know if it's sometimes they put it on Spike. I don't know if it could be on Seconds Out.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything that, to be honest.
10 o'clock, Channel 5 tomorrow night. So there's two options there if anyone needs a Friday night boxing fix, going into the big one on Saturday night as well. So,
it's domestically in it. UK scene covered off. So from the UK, from the domestic scene, we'll go over stateside across the Atlantic.
Yeah.
I know there's a couple of fights on a certain top rank card caught your eye. Want to go into them in a bit more detail?
Aye, Top Rank, fair play to Top Rank. They've been sort of one of the pioneers of COVID boxing, and I think they were putting shows on well before everyone else. Again, I think I touched on it earlier about Premier Sports. Premier Sports have, since like the last few months, been pretty a little bit rejuvenated boxing wise. I don't know where it came from. I don't know if it's going to be a long term direction, but they had Crawford Brute on there. They had Spence Garcia, and they've also got this card this weekend as well. The Shakur Stevenson card. Huge fan of his. Like, I don't subscribe to Premier Sports, but it is something, if they're going to continue it, there's definitely a gap in the UK market now to pick up stateside fights for whatever reason, budget wise, I guess. Sky and BT haven't been. DAZN, I guess, will enter the market very shortly and pick up some of it.
Entered.
Yeah, have entered.
But like December 1st, get signed up, baby.
No, but yeah, sign up with our link. That's where we should have the link going straight.
Yeah, I'll find it in the description.
But I mean, like, end of it as in put the first fight on sort of thing. And but I Premier Sports, fair play. They're showing a lot of stateside stuff, and they've got this one on this weekend. Some good American fighters on there. Shakur Stevenson, Edgar Berlanga, who's on just a mental run of stoppage victories at super middle. Wouldn't put it past him. Get another one again. Felix Verdejo's on there. So decent. I think the Stevenson Clary fight is a round for pound fight as well, which gets underway again this weekend for the final round of the year. Round 12, a bit of a bumper round that rolls over to next week, the 19th, and ends with Canelo Callum Smith. So another decent little weekend of stateside boxing. Maybe not the sort of massive names, but decent names all the same.
Yeah, it's good to see them getting out there and staying active. I think Stevenson in particular is one who most boxing fans will be aware of, maybe not the more casual audience, but very decent skill set on him. Young man, silver medal in the Olympics, coming out of that and really riding the crest wave. He's got himself right into the mix for a world title, and I think he's holding a version of the WBO belt. Am I right in thinking that? Like he's a young prospect, but who's already at world level, and that sounds like a bit of a contradiction. But if you think of like Devin Haney at lightweight, and
Lopez as well,
WBT champion, and like Teofimo Lopez, it's these young fighters, this generation where they're coming through and they're getting to world level very young, so they're still learning, but they're incredibly talented at the same time. So hopefully they strike the balance of those learning fights, but getting in with meaningful fights as well. I mean, like Stevenson and Josh Warrington fight was mooted for a long time, and that would have been
quiet now.
Would have been something special. I think it would have been a great fight. Unfortunately, again, promotional rivalries are going to probably get in the way of that one, but he's definitely one to watch out for and could be in sort of cracking these mythical and very subjective pound for pound lists in the next couple of years.
The Warrington one seemed to go a bit quiet, and I read the other day that he should be getting a fight announced for, I think, February next year. So that link went quiet, unfortunately. But like you say, there's another, as there always is, another talented crop of Americans coming through, like you mentioned. So add Gervonta Davis to that list, and there's some outstanding fighters over there. So yeah, there's a bit of stateside action if anyone wants to tune into that this weekend as well. So big weekend of fights starting from Friday night.
We start Friday. We'll end there.
We'll end there, just as usual. When we end, just a big thank you again to people who have tuned in to either this whole new video format thing we do on YouTube or on Spotify, SoundCloud, or Apple Podcasts. We thank you again, and it would mean the world to us if you would like or follow or subscribe or leave a review. We've had some cracking guests on the podcast recently. We've had Michael Conlon last Sunday, which is fantastic, and then British champion Denzel Bentley midweek. So we're really trying to strike that balance between just me and him waffling on for about pay-per-view and getting some decent guests on there as well. Lee Eaton was on from MTK. Hopefully a couple more by the end of the year. And yeah, just thanks to everyone that's sort of following us and listening to us. It means a lot. We've had some good feedback in recent weeks, so thank you.